This man had a lot of trial and tribulations with Dai because he worked around the time they went out of business because of management run into the dirt. They ran the company into the dirt. And to add insult to injury, the brass never really believed in Noriaki Yuasa in the beginning. Yuasa recalled many times during the filming of the first Gamera that they would scoff at him and say, "That's it? That's what we're wasting our money on?" Special thanks to August Ragone for this information. Just imagine going into work every single day, every day, and the brass constantly saying to you, "That's it? That's what we're wasting our money on? You're what we're wasting our money on?" I would get sick of it really quick. It would become a very toxic work environment. But Yuasa did the opposite. He kept pushing forward, and by God, he was going to make Gamera. It is important to know that before he came along, Toho basically had a monopoly over the kaiju genre. There were lots of tokusatsu flicks, but not many kaiju films. Dai took a different approach to making Gamera, and I won't go into the film that failed that would eventually go into Gamera. That would be a video all on its own. That's a fascinating story. But they took a different direction. They made Yuasa, in an attempt to save money, they had him both be the director, the live-action director, and the director of special effects. Only Shusuke Kaneko and Shinji Higuchi have done this to my knowledge, and it's no small feat. I could be wrong there, but it's no small feat. Yuasa recalled sleeping in the sheds and such, learning about all the ins and outs from former Tsuburaya employees. He would work 20-hour days most of the time, bouncing back and forth between live action and the effects staffs. But there was a reason for such dedication on his part. Noriaki Yuasa, his first film, a musical comedy, I believe, had failed miserably in the box office. Having your first film be a flop is not a good stage setter for your big career, and because of this, Dai was skeptical for handing Gamera over to him. But nobody else really wanted the job except Yuasa, who saw this as an opportunity to save his sinking ship. Yuasa not only jumped at the opportunity to prove himself, but he took it as like a personal mission to make a film worthy of Godzilla. And though that is heavily debatable, I don't really care for the first Gamera films, nor the Showa Gamera films as a whole, with the exception of Barugan, it did prove that others in Japan could cash in on the Godzilla success, the whole hoopla that was the Godzilla franchise. Because it was thought that this was Tsuburaya's territory, on top of the skepticism from the brass at Dai, on top of the scathing remarks of it being a lowbrow film, even the crew of Gamera proved to be less than remarkable. Yuasa is a director, and thus needs to take charge. People on the effects crew often would mock him behind his back, and even one managed to spit vile at Yuasa, mocking him, saying, "Who do you think you are, Tsuburaya?" Yuasa, at one point, had enough, and at this point he snapped, yelling, "Around here you damn well better believe it." And from then on, the crew never gave him as much grief. It also showed to them how much he wanted Gamera to succeed. Because no one else clearly believed in the project, even the brass. No one believed Gamera would be a success. No one believed the film would work. Everyone, again, thought Tsuburaya had the monopoly over the kaiju genre, and so did Toho. I believe, from what I've read from August Ragone, and what he's noted, that Yuasa was nice to a fault. He was a man who externally showed timidness in order to try to please others, while inside he was constantly battling his own worth and his own demons. And though he has passed away, his influence is duly noted by people like August Ragone and myself, because without him, a lot of other movies would not have been made. With the unexpected success of Gamera, Gamera was a gigantic success that shocked everyone. It was like the Lego movie, but for a kaiju film. Oh wait, we did get that with Godzilla 2014, never mind. Dai wanted a sequel. They were like, sequel, we need money now. But to add insult to injury, instead of giving it to Yuasa, They demoted him to just special effects director and gave the director of Gamera vs. Baragon, the man who was originally going to do it but thought it was too lowbrow for him, but now suddenly when they're shoving all this money in it, he took it up. Now, normally people would take such a demotion as a jab, and I know I would, and just about anybody would, but Yuasa's side, basically a breath of relief instead of getting upset. With the experience making Gamera, Yuasa was ready to really prove himself not as a director, but as a special effects wizard. He was the first man to really do this that wasn't involved with Eiji Tsuburaya in really any way. He had to learn everything from the ground up, just like Eiji Tsuburaya. He had to learn all the ins and outs himself by trial and error, just like Tsuburaya. And as Yuasa says he wants to prove himself, Gamera vs. Baragon has had such a huge budget, one of the biggest budgeted films of that year when it was released in Japan. And having two directors showed it. Shogo Tanaka was known for changing things on the spot as a director. And Yuasa recalled this, and August Ragone speaks about this in the audio commentary for the film. And it was always up to Yuasa to figure out a way to deal with it. This is in great contrast to the collaborative nature of, let's say, Ishiro Honda and Eiji Tsuburaya, or even Jun Fukuda and Sadamasa Arikawa, who they went through many weeks of planning. Both of these teams went through many weeks of pre-planning and pre-production before shooting to know exactly what each other wanted and exactly what each other were doing. It was a very symbiotic relationship, these two people. But yet it was clear, was not in charge. Yuasa wasn't making any real decisions. He was just a special effects guy, and that was it. Shogo Tanaka was very old-fashioned, and it explains a lot because he was a very old-fashioned director. And that ultimately Shogo Tanaka was the one calling literally all of the shots. And Yuasa did not seem to mind this. With the demotion, it allowed Yuasa to focus all of his energy on one thing, and that was the special effects. Again, he wanted to prove to people that he was indeed a special effects wizard, and anyone who questions the special effects for all of the Gamera films, rightfully so, especially the later ones, oh my god. You look at Gamera vs. Baragon, and you're like, you can see the talent that this man has visually for his special effects. A very creative man, but yet also very, this is key, different than Tsuburaya. He wasn't just copying the Tsuburaya style. He was making something onto his own style of effects. And that's what's really interesting and like what sets the Dai movies separate from Toho or from Toei or any other the five major studios when they all released one in 1967. They all have their individual style, and Yuasa certainly had his own when working on the Gamera films. And at the same time, I also subscribe to the notion that these kaiju films are simply too large, too complicated, and too cumbersome for one person to helm both the special effects director and the actual live-action director. I do completely subscribe to that notion. Maybe it's not that much of a challenge, but here's the big difference between, what happens and why I say that it's a difficult job. Time. Time is ridiculously short in Japanese films to make a movie, so to do all of that, you're lucky you don't have a heart attack. And because Yuasa was just focusing on his visual effects, the results were, in my opinion, not only the best effects from the Showa Gamera films, but some of the best miniature suitmation effects ever put to screen, period. There is just so much detail that Yuasa had often overlooked while making not only the first Gamera film, but the subsequent sequels, as well as due to a mixture of both budget restraints and him being both the live-action and effects director again. Now, despite Gamera vs. Baragon being my favorite of the Showa Gamera movies and being the only Showa Gamera film I truly enjoy, it didn't do too well in the box office. I mean, it made its money back, but it wasn't a huge hit like the first one. And thus, the subsequent sequels were born. Dai was horribly mismanaged, and they were hemorrhaging for money by 1967. And again, to make clear, 1967 was the year that Shochiku, Toei, Toho, Nikatsu, and Dai released a kaiju film. That was the tip of the iceberg for the kaiju genre. But their situation, Dai, was very much like 20th Century Fox in the United States at the same time. Dai saw a profit still to be made with Gamera. They basically wanted to milk the franchise for everything it's got, especially since the other kaiju flicks released the year before, and even during the same year, were all relatively successful. Low-budget films, low-risk films, children love them, they go to see them. Dai heads saw instant money in their pockets for spending little in the process. One way they could cut the budget down significantly on the following Gamera sequels, starting with Gauss, was by making Yuasa both the special effects director and the live-action director again. Oh boy. Yuasa eagerly took up the job with Gauss and made a pretty enjoyable film, even though the quality took a major hit. Like, seriously, compare the effects and just the everything from Gauss to the previous film, Barugon, and there's no competition. Barugon wins hands down. But as the sequels went along, the smaller their budgets were, stock footage became the norm, and less scenes featured our favorite giant, flying, fire-breathing turtle. It got so bad that in 1971, making Gamera vs. Zebra, the last true ones of the Showa era, one day Yuasa arrived on set with the actors to find 90% of the crew had not been paid for the last month and had quit, leaving Yuasa along with the DP serving as cameraman. Boy, can I relate to that. An audio guy, and Yuasa often being the Slater, the second AC if you want me to be technical. And this is supposedly for a mainstream studio. I just want to reiterate that. This sounds like a typical film made by me, with only $1,000 in my pocket, and a ham sandwich for good nature. So props to Yuasa for making anything cohesive under those horrific circumstances. And you know what? Through it all, Yuasa looked back at his Gamera films and would often smile, because he looked at these films in the right way. Gamera entertained children. A little antidote. My mother used to take care of children, and she had one kid named Merrick. He was so little when this happened, and now he's in school, and it's kind of funny seeing how he's grown up. But he caught me watching some Ultraman and Godzilla clips, and he became curious. A typical boy liking dinosaurs smashing things. I mean, why not? That's all boys like, dinosaurs smashing things, and if they don't, they're lying. Well, one day we sat down and we watched Gamera vs. Gauss on YouTube. It was the horrible pan and scan copy, the public domain AIP dub. But it was good to keep him still while my mother was cleaning and cooking their lunch. He was so engrossed with it that we ate dinner and watched Gamera vs. Jiger next, and he didn't move an inch. I was so proud of him. To this day, he loves Gamera. And I think he's 12 now. And his mother always makes sure to tell me that I created a monster. And that's all Yuasa wanted to do. He wanted to entertain children, and Merrick is proof to me that not only did Yuasa succeed, but he also brought significant joy to that kid's life, my life, and the lives of thousands of other children, all gathering around their computers to watch their favorite flying, fire-breathing turtle kick some ass in ridiculous ways. Yuasa never thought his films were bad, like Jun Fukuda did. Yuasa knew his films served their purpose and succeeded, and Yuasa took that with pride. And so would I if I had made these kind of films aimed for children featuring a giant monster. He didn't care about the awards or the notoriety in the end. Yuasa cared about the fans and those who loved his movies for their silliness as children, and he loved the fans with all his heart. And that is the kaiju man you should know, but you don't. If you haven't, buy the Shout Factory DVDs of both Gamera the Giant Monster and Gamera vs. Barugon. The picture quality may not be up to par as the Blu-rays, sure, but you get good subtitles and two great audio commentaries full of more information about Noriaki Yuasa and the making of these two films. So like AN Productions on Facebook, join Geeks for Geeks if you wish, follow me on Twitter, all the links are in the description below, my god. Leave a comment talking about your favorite Gamera moment or a kaiju man that you think should have more notoriety than he does. Give him a shout out. I love learning about new people. And in the end, this is Adam Noyes of AN Productions saying, sayonara.